Hello there, woven web enthusiasts. Today we have a different type of story. This is an actual affidavit in which a law enforcement investigator in Texas makes his case to prosecutors, recommending charges against a guy that took extreme measures to spy on his soon-to-be ex-wife, who was also on OnlyFans. To start with, he installed cameras in her Airbnb and recorded her while she recorded herself for OnlyFans. He accessed her personal computer without her knowledge and recorded her files that depicted her, quote, naked genitals, naked breasts, and naked buttocks, unquote. And he did all this and then presented it in discovery in the divorce proceedings. And to top it all off, he forgot his cameras in the Airbnb, and instead of just renting it for another day and retrieving the cameras silently, he asked the owner of the Airbnb if he could get into the apartment and get his cameras, at which point the Airbnb owner apparently called the cops. But you can skip ahead on this if you like. Keep in mind the affiant is the police officer here making this statement after his investigation has been concluded. The complainant is the woman or soon-to-be ex-wife, and the defendant is our guy who has made a series of very poor decisions. And of course, this man is innocent until proven guilty. And this is the actual affidavit with information redacted to protect the identity of this couple. The officer believes the defendant intentionally intercepted and endeavored to intercept an oral communication, namely an oral communication made by the woman to another person using social media while inside the complainant's residence, a rented Airbnb location, by installing cameras inside the complainant's residence, a rented Airbnb location, that recorded both audio and video. The officer goes on to state that he believes the defendant committed the felony offenses of invasive visual recording and unlawful interception, use, or disclosure of wire, oral, or electronic communications against the woman. And the officer bases his beliefs on the following. The woman stated on or about November 28th, she confronted the defendant about secret cameras in her residence, which the defendant denied at the time. The woman learned that between September 13th and September 24th, the defendant, with the intent to invade the complainant's privacy, gained access to her computer without her permission, opened her password-protected social media account without her permission, located non-public photos and videos that depicted the intimate areas of the complainant, and then took pictures of the explicit material without her permission. The woman learned on November 13th that the defendant secretly intercepted oral communications by recording a conversation she had using a communications application on her phone with another person. The complainant then learned that the defendant covertly entered her residence around the beginning of November and installed secret cameras in her residence with the intent to intercept oral and electronic communications without any authorization from the complainant, the owners of the residence, or a court order. After the secret cameras were installed, the complainant learned the defendant recorded video of her intimate areas in her residence, to which she had a reasonable expectation that her intimate areas were not subject to public view. The officer learned through the investigation that the complainant and defendant are married with one child and are going through a divorce that was initiated in August. The officer learned the woman had an account with a social media platform called OnlyFans. The officer learned the complainant's OnlyFans account was password protected, and within the account, the affiant has a non-public media storage that she can upload pictures and videos. These pictures and videos remain private unless the complainant decides to publish them, either to the public side of her OnlyFans account or in another way. The officer learned that she had never published any photos to her public side of the OnlyFans account. However, she had sent some photos to people via direct message. The officer learned that the defendant was aware of the OnlyFans account, that the woman had never shown him what was in the account storage or allowed him access to the account. The affiant learned the complainant returned to the residence at the request of the defendant around September 13th. She complied because she was ill and she also wanted to see her daughter. While the complainant was at the residence, unknown to her, the defendant accessed her computer and logged onto the complainant's OnlyFans account. The defendant then opened the complainant's non-public media storage within OnlyFans. The defendant located several explicit pictures and videos of the complainant's intimate areas, including her naked genitals, naked breasts, and naked buttocks. The defendant then recorded the visual images of the complainant's intimate areas that were stored on the complainant's non-public media file. The affiant learned the complainant left her computer in her vehicle while staying at the residence, and that the defendant entered her vehicle without her knowledge to access the computer without her knowledge. The affiant learned the complainant moved into an Airbnb on October 13th with the agreement that the defendant would pay for the Airbnb because she did not have access to their bank accounts. The defendant booked the Airbnb from the owners and was given the front door code to the residence. Defendant continued to live at the address while the complainant moved to the Airbnb. Affiant learned the defendant bought 3 hidden cameras on November 4th and November 9th from a website that sells hidden cameras, GPS trackers, anti-phone tap devices, counter-surveillance, and infidelity detection devices to the public. Affiant learned that the defendant installed these hidden cameras in the Airbnb without the consent or knowledge of the complainant, the owners, or a court order. The defendant accessed the Airbnb with the front door code without informing anyone he was entering the residence. The owners of the Airbnb learned of the hidden cameras on December 10th when the defendant contacted them and asked if he could enter the property and remove the cameras. This was after the complainant moved out of the Airbnb on December 2nd and another renter moved in on December 4th. Affiant also learned the defendant made a police report on December 10th admitting to taking videos of the complainant while she was on adult websites. The defendant provided screenshots from the videos that were produced from the hidden cameras in the complainant's residence while she stayed at the Airbnb. The defendant has since claimed all the videos he took of the complainant in the Airbnb were deleted. While the screenshots do not depict any intimate parts of the complainant was able to provide the pictures she had of herself depicting intimate parts of herself taken at the same time and same location within the Airbnb that the defendant's cameras were recording. The complainant did not know about the hidden cameras when she made the intimate visual material. The affiant also learned via another police report the defendant made on November 18th that he recorded a private conversation between her and another person. This conversation was made while the complainant was in the Airbnb. The complainant was speaking to the other person over via a social media application called Instagram. The defendant provided audio clips of the conversation to police officers. While listening to the audio clips, affiant could hear both the complainant's voice and another man's voice. This oral communication between the complainant and other person was made electronically and was a private conversation. The complainant did not know it was being recorded, nor did she give consent to the defendant to intercept the communication. Through the divorce process, the defendant provided copies of the recordings he made to the complainant as part of the discovery. The complainant then provided the recordings to myself, the affiant. The affiant believes the defendant committed the following offenses: invasive visual recording between September 13th and September 24th by invading the privacy of the complainant via accessing the complainant's secure, non-public media storage and making recordings of pictures and videos that depicts the complainant's intimate areas. The complainant had a reasonable expectation that the images were not subject to public view. Unlawful interception, use, or disclosure of wire, oral, or electronic communications between November 4th and November 13th by covertly entering the complainant's residence and installing hidden recording devices with the intent to capture electronic and oral communications of the complainant. Unlawful interception, use, or disclosure of wire, oral, or electronic communications on November 13th by intentionally recording, via one of the hidden recording devices, an electronic and oral conversation the complainant had with another person while the complainant was in the Airbnb and the other person was in another city, and invasive visual recording between November 4th and November 28th via the hidden cameras the defendant placed in the Airbnb by recording the complainant while she took photos and videos of herself exposing her intimate body parts inside the Airbnb, where she had a reasonable expectation that her actions and her intimate areas were not within the public view. Affiant believes the defendant invaded the complainant's privacy by committing these criminal acts and made the recordings and police reports in an attempt to gain leverage over the complainant in the divorce process. The complainant wants to press charges. All right there, woven web enthusiasts, that's not some AI-generated report. That's the real deal. What do you think? This is a very good example of what not to do as a man during a divorce. It's also a very good example of what type of woman to not marry to begin with. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I appreciate you listening.